everyone, it's Pete here. Welcome to part 2 of my build guide of this, the Tamiya Volvo A60H Hauler kit. In part 1 I did steps 1 to 12, which meant I got the gearbox together, which is also the chassis on this kit, and also got the motor installed. So step 13, we're putting on the front suspension arms and the drive cups, and this is the point where we're opening parts bag B. So we just need to poke the black O-rings into the drive cups using the drive shaft. The lower arms are made of C16 and C17 and go together with 2 of the 10mm self-tappers. The upper suspension arm C3 goes on with a step screw, and as before I'm putting a washer on as well, which helps to stop the suspension from binding. I also tend to put a spot of glue on these screws to stop them from shaking loose. The lower arms are both held in place by this U-shaped shaft. Then it's just a matter of putting in the drive cups, or gearbox joints as they call them in the instructions. So step 14, we're building up the front uprights. The 5mm ball connector screws into the B9 part. You need to put a bearing in the back, and you can use the axle to help seat it properly. Then the B9 fits inside the B1 using 2 of the big step screws MB2. So you just need to make 2 that are the opposite way around to each other. Step 15, we're attaching the front uprights and drive shafts. First up, we need to attach this little F4 putt which holds in the U-shaped shaft. Next we're putting in the drive shafts. Now they're using AW grease. Not only have I not got any left, but I think it's a bit too sticky really and would attract the dust, so I'm just using a bit of standard grease. The upright is attached to the lower suspension with the 32mm screw pins, and it attaches to the upper suspension arm with a step screw. So I'm just checking everything moves freely and then doing the same on the other side. Step 16, we're attaching the E5 and E6 parts and also putting in the centre drive cups. So these bits go in with the 8mm machine screws. They're talking about greasing up the screws and the bits, but I didn't actually, and they still went in okay. Just checking that they're nice and flush inside the battery tray. Again, there are O-rings inside the drive cups, and I was finding it easier actually to poke them in with the screwdriver to start with and then use the drive shaft. So the drive cups go in. They always say about putting grease on these, but you don't need to if you're using bearings. Step 17 is attaching the centre uprights, which go on with the 32mm screw pins and the step screws. Step 18 is attaching the rear arms if you aren't doing the 4-wheel steering, but I have decided to do the 4-wheel steering, so I'm going to the back of the manual. The lower arms are C16 and C17. What we're doing here is essentially the same as what we did on the front, except the lower arms go on with the 46mm screw pins instead of the U-shaped shaft. So we need to put in the drive cups, which is actually step 19. So step 2 of the 4-wheel steer instructions, we're building the rear uprights, which are the same as the front ones. Step 3, we're attaching the rear steering uprights. So step 4, attaching the rear dampers, which we haven't actually built yet, so we're back to the main instructions at step 22. Now this is to build the standard friction shocks that come with the kit. I'm actually going to use these CVA oil dampers, and I've got these slightly softer springs to go with them because I know they work well on the dump truck. What I'm going to do is build up one of the friction shocks so that I know what length to build the oil shocks at. So the MC12 32mm screw goes through the C2 body, and then you screw the C12 end on. You need to cut off a 12mm length of tube and put a little bit of grease on. Then the tube goes into the damper body and you put the C1 top on. So the rubber tube inside does provide a little bit of damping with these. The spring goes on next on the C9 part, holds it in place. Step 23, you put in the F11 spacer on the damper. I'm not actually going to attach these because I'm going to be using the oil dampers. It looks like about 63mm between the holes on these. So I need to make these mini shocks the same length using the bits that they give you. So you need to put the first E-clip on with pliers. I'm using the piston end with the one hole which is the firmest. Then I'm just putting the other E-clip on. I'm going to be using this 1000 CST damper oil, and first just put a little bit around the bottom where the O-rings go. Once both O-rings are in and oiled, I just screw on the end part, but I'm not going to fully tighten it just yet. I tend to put a little bit of oil in the bottom first. I'm just holding my finger over the hole to make sure it doesn't run out the other end. So to get the right length of shock I need to use this V3 spacer. So I just need to top up the oil. Then run the piston up and down to get rid of the bubbles. I tend to put the oil seal in when the piston's quite near the top because it stops it rebounding so much when it all goes together. So there's a little bit of rebound, but I can live with that. So I need the longer rod end to get the correct shock length. So these are the softer springs that I bought separately rather than the kit springs. Now these do come out a millimetre or so longer than the kit dampers, but from previous experience that is fine. So it's just a matter of making 6 of those the same. So with the kit dampers you're going to use these step screws, but I'm going to use these ball connectors that came with the oil dampers. Now I'm using a spot of super glue because these can shake loose. Now these lower suspension arms are quite soft plastic, and despite gluing these ball connectors in, one of them did shake loose during the test drive. So what I've done, I've ended up using the little tube that you get with the oil shocks with the little bump in the middle, and you get a sort of slightly longer self-tapping screw, and that sort of seems to stay in a little bit better. So back to what I did first time around of just snapping the shocks onto the ball connectors, and then just doing the same thing all the way around. Now that's all looking good, and it seems like a good place to end part 2. Thanks ever so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.